I used to think silence was peaceful, the kind you get in the woods before dawn, or in your apartment at 3 a.m. when the city finally exhales. But real silence, the kind where not even air moves, where photons hang suspended mid-flight, that silence has weight. It presses against your eardrums like deep water. It makes you understand why prisoners in solitary confinement go mad. My name is Dr. Elliot Vance, and I've been alone for what might be 3 weeks, or 3 months. Without the sun moving, without clocks ticking, time becomes more of a concept than a measurement. What I know for certain is this: 23 days ago, by my count, I activated the Threshold Resonance Array at the Kelvin Institute, and the world stopped. Everything stopped. The rain hung in the air like a bead curtain. My colleague Adriana froze mid-laugh, coffee suspended between her cup and lips. The security guard downstairs became a statue with 1 foot raised, forever walking toward a destination he'll never reach. Everyone stopped, everything stopped, except me. The first hour was fascinating in that detached, scientific way that defined my entire career. I walked through the lab, waving my hand in front of Adriana's face. No reaction. I checked her pulse, pressing my fingers against her throat, and felt nothing. Not death, just absence, like touching a photograph. Then I went outside. The rain hung there, thousands of droplets, suspended at every height and angle, creating a 3-dimensional curtain of frozen water. I reached out and touched one. The moment my finger made contact, I felt it give. The droplet liquefied, suddenly warm and mobile in a world of stillness. It fell, streaming down my hand, dropping 6 inches before it solidified again, mid-air, re-freezing into the world's stasis. I touched another. Same thing. The water came alive under my fingertips, fell briefly, and then locked back into position. I stood there for 20 minutes, touching raindrops, watching them fall and freeze, creating strange cascading patterns in the suspended storm. Each droplet I touched seemed to briefly enter my timeline, sharing my ability to move before the world reclaimed it. Whatever had happened to me, to time itself, I could temporarily spread it through contact. Objects I touched could move, but only while I held them or immediately after I released them. Then they rejoined the frozen world. The second hour, I tried to restart the array. The controls wouldn't respond at first, but when I pressed the keys firmly, I felt them give slightly under my fingers, warming to my touch before going cold and rigid again. The screens showed the exact moment of activation, frozen like everything else. I smashed the emergency shutdown with a fire extinguisher. The glass didn't crack properly. It just accepted the impact, the fracture pattern spreading part way before freezing mid-propagation, suspended in the surface like a fossil. By the third hour, I was running through the streets screaming. That's when I discovered that sound still works. At least for me. My voice echoed off buildings where people stood frozen in doorways, where cars hung suspended in intersections, where birds hovered mid-flight like ornaments on invisible strings. I screamed until my throat bled, and no one answered. Now, 3 weeks later, I've stopped screaming. I've developed routines. That's what humans do, isn't it? We create structure to fight chaos. Every morning, I wake up in my apartment where my girlfriend Denise stands eternally at the living room window, her hand raised to wave at someone on the street below. I make breakfast, which requires a strange new ritual. When I turn on the tap, the water stays frozen in the pipes until I touch the faucet. Then it flows briefly, warming under my grip, before going rigid again the moment I pull my hand away. I've learned to work quickly, filling a glass before the water refreezes midstream. Food from the fridge is the same. The containers are cold and rigid until I grasp them. Then they become soft, become pliable. The food inside is frozen solid until my fork touches it. Then it briefly thaws enough to eat before going hard again. I'm sustaining myself on these moments of borrowed motion, pulling objects temporarily into my timeline before the world reclaims them. I brush my teeth, I get dressed, I pretend I'm going to work, like always. Then I walk. The frozen city reveals itself differently each day, depending on where I look. Yesterday, I spent 6 hours in the Children's Museum, studying the exhibits about time and motion. There's a pendulum frozen mid-swing. When I touched it, it completed one full arc before going still again, locked at a different angle than before. A Newton's cradle with the metal balls suspended at angles that should be impossible. In the gift shop, a woman reaches for her child's hand, her face creased with worry about something that will never happen now. I've been taking photographs, not with a camera, those don't work anymore, but with chalk. I draw outlines around people, marking where they stand. The chalk itself is strange in my hand. It warms when I grip it, becomes soft and usable, leaving marks that seem to carry some residue of my altered time state. It's my way of documenting this, I suppose, proving I was here, proving this happened. When I return to the same spots days later, something strange happens. The chalk outlines have faded, not erased, not disturbed, just faded, like they're aging while the world stays young, as if touching them, marking them with something from my timeline, has left them vulnerable to entropy in a way the rest of the frozen world isn't. But this morning, I found something worse. One of my outlines near the plaza fountain, the one I'd drawn around a businessman, frozen mid-stride. The chalk wasn't just faded, it was smudged from the inside, as if someone had stood within the outline and shifted their weight, dragging the chalk inward with their movement. I stood there for 20 minutes, staring at that smudge line, trying to convince myself I'd done it, that I'd accidentally stepped on my own work. But I hadn't been near that outline in days, and the smudge pattern was wrong. It came from inside the shape, pressing outward. Something else had stood there, in the spaces between seconds. I tried to shake it off. Exhaustion, I told myself. Isolation, playing tricks. But I couldn't stop thinking about it as I walked home, and that's when I started noticing the reflections. Store windows along Fifth Avenue. As I passed them, my reflection appeared normal, but in my peripheral vision, in the glass behind me after I'd passed, I could swear I saw myself twice. A brief double exposure, like my reflection was taking an extra moment to follow me away from the glass. I stopped walking and stared at a bank window. My reflection stared back. I raised my right hand. It raised its right hand. I turned my head. It turned its head. Everything normal. But I felt watched anyway. That's when I started noticing my hands. It began with the fingernails. They'd grown faster. Now I have to trim them twice a day or they curl like claws. Then the calluses appeared, thick ridges on my palms and fingertips, as if my body is adapting to constant use. When I touch frozen rain now, my fingertips don't get cold. They've developed this strange resilience, like leather that's been worked and oiled for years. My hair grows faster too. I shaved my head a week ago because it had grown past my shoulders. This morning, it's already touching my collar. I should be hungry all the time, burning through calories as the only moving thing in a static universe. But I'm not. I eat because I remember I should, not because my stomach demands it. My body is changing the rules, adapting to be the sole participant in a race that everyone else has paused. 3 nights ago, I found the journals. The Kelvin Institute has a restricted archive in the basement, the kind of place where they keep the research that didn't work, the experiments that went wrong, the theories that led nowhere. I broke in easily. The lock was frozen until I touched it. Then it turned smoothly in my grip. Who's going to stop me now? I've been reading by flashlight, and what I found makes my new fingernails seem trivial. Our experiment, the threshold resonance array, wasn't new, not even close. There are records going back centuries, different names, different technologies, but the same basic principle, attempting to pause local space-time through resonant frequency manipulation. In 1743, an alchemist in the Prague created a stillness chamber that stopped time for everything inside it. He called it the Sanctuary of Suspended Moments. The chamber was destroyed, but his notes survived. He wrote about how he aged 7 years in what he experienced as 3 months, how his body adapted, how he saw things moving in the stillness, shadows that walked in the spaces between seconds. In 1891, a physicist in London built something called the temporal stasis engine. She disappeared. Her lab was found with everything frozen, including dust particles in the air. Everything except her journals, which described the watchers in the spaces between moments. She wrote that time wasn't a river you could dam. It was a membrane you could tear. And on the other side of that tear, something lived. The notes in the archive reference something older still, a medieval grimoire called the Codex Temporis, which described time not as a dimension, but as a living thing, a vast organism that could be wounded. The Codex mentioned time binders, people who could move through frozen moments. It said they weren't people anymore after a while. They became something else, something that existed in the cracks, in the spaces between seconds. I wanted to dismiss it as superstition mixed with bad science, but then I read the last entry in the restricted files, dated 1952, from a Project Threshold researcher named Dr. Emil Rothschild. We succeeded in creating a 47-second stasis field. Subject entered the field consciously. When the field collapsed, subject had aged 6 months. Subject's cellular structure had fundamentally altered. Subject could no longer tolerate normal time. Subject described the experience as being the only word in a frozen sentence. Subject expired 12 hours after extraction. Autopsy revealed massive systemic adaptation to non-temporal existence. Conclusion: human biology can adapt to a stopped time, but cannot adapt back. The report ended there. No mention of what happened to the research. No explanation for why we rebuilt it 70 years later. But I know why. Because brilliant people are arrogant, and I was one of the most arrogant of all. I thought I could succeed where others failed. I thought I was smarter, more careful, more prepared. But I was wrong. This afternoon, something happened that I can't explain away as exhaustion or isolation. I was in my apartment, pacing the living room, when I knocked my coffee mug off the side table. It fell naturally, heading for the floor. I lunged to catch it, but my shadow moved first. On the wall, cast by the frozen afternoon light coming through the window, my shadow's arm extended downward before mine did. I watched it happen. My shadow bent, reaching for where the mug would land, while my actual body was still mid-lunge. I caught the mug, feeling it warm in my grip, becoming pliable and real as it entered my timeline. My shadow straightened a half a second after I did. I stood there, mug trembling in my hand, staring at the wall. My shadow mimicked my posture perfectly now, still, obedient, normal. But it had moved first. It had anticipated my action, or maybe decided on its own to catch the falling object. I set the mug down carefully and stepped away from the wall. My shadow followed, exactly as it should. I raised my arm, it raised its arm. I waved, and it waved. Everything normal. Except I knew what I'd seen. My shadow was learning to move independently, learning to exist in the spaces between seconds where I now lived. That night, I noticed my shadow doesn't match my movements anymore. Not exactly. There's a lag that feels wrong, unnatural. No, not a lag. It moves before I do now, leading instead of following, anticipating my actions in the spaces between seconds. And today, as I walked through the frozen crowds near Central Plaza, I saw something that made my new calluses go numb. One of the frozen people, the man in the business suit I'd outlined with chalk days ago, his position had changed. Not much, maybe 6 inches forward, but I'd photographed this exact spot. I'd drawn chalk outlines. He'd moved. I ran back to my apartment, to Denise at the living room window. Her hand was lower now, still raised, still waving, but lower, like she'd been waving for weeks, and her arm was getting tired. Except she wasn't supposed to be able to get tired. She wasn't supposed to be able to move at all. That's when I heard it. A sound like ice cracking on a lake, or like glass beginning to fracture under pressure. It came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through the frozen air with a frequency that made my teeth ache. Time was trying to move again. The universe was straining against whatever I'd done to it, flexing like a muscle that had been held tense too long. And in that moment of almost movement, I saw them. Figures standing between the frozen people, translucent, flickering things that existed in the spaces between seconds. They weren't ghosts, not exactly. They were more like after images, echo shapes of something that moves through stopped time the way I do, but they'd been doing it longer, much longer. One of them turned to look at me. It had my face, or rather, it had what my face might look like after years of adaptation, after becoming something that lives in the cracks between moments, that exists in the spaces between seconds. Its eyes were filmed over with something that looked like frost, and when it smiled, I saw that its teeth had fused into a single ridge of bone. It raised one hand and pointed at my chest. Then the crackling sound stopped. The figures vanished. The world remained frozen. But now I understand. The experiment didn't just stop time for everyone else. It tore a hole in the membrane, and I fell through it into the space between seconds. That's where the time benders live, the ones who came before, the ones who adapted so completely they can't exist in normal time anymore, who dwell in the spaces between seconds. I'm becoming one of them. My body knows it even if my mind resists. The calluses, the fast-growing hair and nails, the shadow that moves on its own, these are adaptations. My body is learning to survive in stillness, to extract energy from frozen moments, to exist outside the flow, to live in the spaces between seconds where they wait. I found more journals this afternoon, hidden in a false panel at the archive. Dr. Rothschild's personal notes. He wrote about how the 1952 subject described hearing whispers in the stillness, voices of others who'd been trapped before, how the subject said they were still waiting, not malevolent, just present, existing in the spaces between everyone else's heartbeats. The subject said the worst part wasn't being alone, it was knowing you'd never be alone again. Because once you adapt, once you become something that lives in stopped time, you can see all the others who exist in the spaces between seconds, and they can see you. Tonight, I sat on the couch and talked to Denise's frozen form at the window. I told her about the changes, about what I'm becoming. I told her I'm sorry. Sorry I was arrogant. Sorry I thought I could bend the universe to my will. Sorry I'm losing my humanity one adaptation at a time. As I talked, I noticed movement in the corner of my eye, my shadow on the wall. It was moving differently now. It leaned forward, listening like it had its own curiosity about what I was saying. Her phone was in her hand. raised halfway to her ear, frozen mid-call. Without thinking, I stood and walked to her. I reached out and touched it. The moment my fingers made contact, I felt it give. The rigid plastic warmed, became pliable and real. I closed my hand around it and lifted it from her frozen fingers, which offered no resistance once the phone entered my timeline. It was warm in my palm, almost alive. I could feel it humming faintly, as if my touch had wakened something dormant. I walked across the living room and set it on the bookshelf by the door, watching as it went cold and rigid again the moment I released it, refreezing in its new position. I don't know why I did it. Maybe to prove I still could affect things. Maybe to leave some mark that I'd been here, that I'd existed in this impossible moment. Maybe because some part of me wanted to violate the stillness, to prove I could still reach into the frozen world and change it. Then I felt it, a vibration, deep and subsonic, like the universe taking a breath. The frozen rain outside the window trembled. Denise's suspended hand shifted a quarter of an inch. The cracking sound returned, louder this time, like ice breaking up in spring. Time was restarting. I don't know why. Maybe the universe can only stay broken for so long before it heals itself. Maybe my adaptation is what triggers it, like a body rejecting a foreign object. All I know is that I felt the world lurch, reality catching up to itself in one massive convulsion of restored causality. The rain fell all at once, every suspended drop hitting the ground in a thunderous cascade that sounded like the end of the world. Car horns blared as drivers jolted back into motion. The birds fell from the sky, dead, unable to restart their hearts. Adriana dropped her coffee cup, and it shattered on the lab floor 3 weeks after she'd lifted it to her lips. Denise's hand completed its wave on its own, reaching toward the window where someone had been, but is no longer there. She turned from the window, lowering her arm, and froze when she saw me standing across the living room. "Elliot, when did you get home? I didn't hear you come in." Her eyes scanned the room, and I saw the exact moment confusion crossed her face. She looked down at her empty hand, stared at her palm, then her eyes swept the living room until they landed on her phone sitting on the bookshelf by the door. "That's... I was just holding that. How did it get there?" She looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw her expression shift from confusion to something else. Concern? Fear, maybe. For her, no time had passed. The world had stopped and started again in the space between her heartbeats. 3 weeks compressed into an instant. But I lived those 3 weeks. I felt every hour of that silence. My body adapted to it, learned to survive in the spaces between seconds. And now, as I stand in our living room with the clock ticking on the wall and traffic moving outside, and Denise asking me what's wrong, why am I looking at her like that? How did her phone get across the room? I realized the truth Dr. Rothschild's subject had learned too late. I can't go back. I watched Denise move, and she's too slow. Everything is too slow. The world crawls forward at an agonizing pace while my body screams to move at the speed of stillness. My heartbeat feels like it's happening in geological time. Each breath takes an eternity. The second hand on the wall clock drags itself forward like it's moving through tar, and each tick is a small death. My shadow on the wall moves before I do now. It knows what I'm about to do before I do it. It's learning to be something separate, something that can exist independently in the spaces between seconds. And behind Denise, standing near the window, I see them. The time benders, translucent figures, watching me with their frost-covered eyes, their fused teeth, their bodies adapted to exist in the spaces between moments, between seconds. They're always there, I realize, moving through the world between everyone's heartbeats, living in the cracks, dwelling in the spaces between seconds where time forgets to move. They're waiting for me to finish adapting, because I'm already halfway gone. My fingernails are curling again, growing even as I stand there. My hair is lengthening, brushing against my collar with each agonizingly slow breath. My shadow is learning to exist independently, moving a fraction ahead of my body. Soon, I won't be able to tolerate normal time at all. I'll exist in the spaces between, moving through a world of people who seem frozen because they're moving at normal speed of reality, while I'm not. Denise is still talking, asking me questions I barely hear. She reaches for my hand, and her movement seems to take minutes. I see her fingers approaching in extreme slow motion, and I know that when she touches me, she'll feel how cold I've become, how different. The time benders near the window step closer. One of them, the one with my face, tilts its head, studying me, recognizing something in me that I don't want to see. Its frost-covered eyes reflect something back at me, something true about what I'm becoming that makes my adapted body go rigid with dread. The clock on the wall ticks. Each tick takes forever. Each second is an eternity I have to wait through. And in those eternities, in those spaces between seconds, I can feel myself drifting away from this moment, from this apartment, from Denise's reaching hand. I want to scream. I want to explain. I want to tell her that I'm sorry, that I didn't know this would happen, that I'm terrified of what I'm becoming. But the words move too slowly through my throat. By the time I could form a sentence, hours would pass for me, days maybe. The gap between her timeline and mine is widening with each moment, pulling me further into the spaces between seconds where the time binders wait. I'm trapped between moments, existing in the spaces between seconds, and I don't know how to get back. I don't know if I can get back. My body is rejecting normal time like a failed transplant, and every tick of that clock, every glacial movement of Denise's hand, every breath that takes an eternity, it's all pushing me further away. The silence that has weight is calling to me, pulling me away from the ticking clock and Denise's warmth and everything that moves at proper speed. I can feel it wrapping around me like a second skin, like it's always been there, waiting for me to notice. The spaces between seconds are becoming more real than the seconds themselves. Denise's hand finally reaches me. Her fingers are warm. I'm not anymore. She gasps, pulling back her slow motion recoil, taking what feels like minutes from my distorted perspective. Elliot, you're freezing. Are you sick? What's happening to you? I open my mouth to answer, But I feel it then, a shifting in my jaw, a pressure. My teeth are beginning to fuse, just like theirs, just like the thing with my face standing near the window, watching me with those frost-covered eyes. The time binder with my face doesn't smile, it just watches, waiting. And I realize with a horror that makes my adapted body go rigid, this isn't an ending, this is a threshold. I'm not dying. I'm not even changing into something new. I'm becoming permanent, forever moving through this altered timeline, forever watching the world crawl forward at its glacial pace, forever unable to touch Denise's warm hand without her recoiling from my cold, forever existing in the cracks where time forgets to move, where silence has weight and shadows learn to think, forever able to reach out and touch the frozen world, pulling objects briefly into my timeline before releasing them back to their stillness. The time binders know this. They've known it since the moment I activated the array, since the moment I fell through into their world, into the spaces they exist in, where they've been waiting. They weren't waiting to welcome me. They were waiting for me to understand what I've done to myself. Denise is backing away now, her movements excruciatingly slow, her face shifting from concern to fear in a transformation that takes eons from my perspective. She's saying something, her lips forming words that take so long to reach my ears that I've forgotten the beginning of her sentence by the time she reaches the end. I try to follow her. I try to move at her speed, but my body won't obey. I exist in the spaces between seconds now, and those spaces are where I'll stay. Every object I touch will briefly join me there, warming under my fingers, coming alive for a moment before the world reclaims it. But I'll never truly be a part of the moving world again. The man who stopped time. Or maybe the man who time stopped for. The time binders near the window are fading now, returning to the shadows, where they live, where I'll join them soon, where I'll exist forever, moving through a frozen world, unable to participate in the flow of moments that everyone else takes for granted, able to touch, to move, to change things, but never able to truly connect with anything that lives in normal time. I look at my shadow on the wall. It looks back. It's moving independently now, shifting its weight, turning its head to examine me with an awareness that isn't mine. Soon, it will separate completely, become another figure in the spaces, another watcher that exists in the cracks. And I understand, finally, what Dr. Rothschild's subject meant. The worst part isn't being alone. It's knowing you're not. It's knowing that in the spaces between seconds, others are waiting, others who've already finished adapting, others who move through the frozen world, touching things, changing things, existing in the silence that has weight. And I'm joining them. Not because I want to, but because I can't stop it. My teeth are fusing. My shadow is separating. The world is moving too slowly for me to ever rejoin it. I am becoming a time binder, forever existing in the spaces between seconds, forever touching a world I can never truly be part of again. Stories that involve time bending or travel have always been a favorite of mine ever since seeing the Time Machine movie way back in the day. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this time bending story. Would you like to hear more time-based stories? I read every comment. And until the next Dark Veil tale, have a frightfully fun day.